Jaya Gopichandavallabha Girivaradhari Jaya Gopichandavallabha Girivaradhari Yashodhanandana Bhaja Jana Yashoda Nandana Bhaja Jana Yamuna Tira Yamuna Tira Vacha Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Jaya Gopi Chanavallabha Girivaradha Jaya Gopi Chanavallabha Girivaradha Yashodhanandana Jana Yashodhanandana Vrajajana Ranjana Yamuna Tira Vanachari Yamuna Tira Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Hare Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Jaya Radha Madhava Radha Madhava Radhe Jaya Radha Raj Bihari Radha Raj Bihari Radhe Jaya Gaurangi Bangaloreshwar Gaurangi Bangaloreshwar Gaurangi Jaya Jagannatha Jaya Balladeva Vaishnubhadra Jaya Sudarshana Jaya Lakshmi Narasimha Jaya Anantadev Prahlad Nrsimhajayo Anantadev Jayo Nitai Chaitanya Jayo Nitai Chaitanya Jayo Nitai Chaitanya Jayo Jai Prabhupada 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 Jaya Jaya Prabhupada Jaya Jai Gurudev Gurudev, Gurudev, Jaya Jaya Gurudev, Nitai Gaur Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Nitai Gaur Hari Bol. Gaur Premanande, Hari Hari Bol. Jai Om Vishnupad Paramahamsa Vidyacharya Sthotara Shata. His divine grace, Abhay Charanarvind Bhakti Vedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada ki Jai. Jai O Vishnupad Paramahamsa Vidyacharya Sthotara Shata. His divine grace, Abhay Charanarvind Bhakti Vedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada ki Jai. Jai O Vishnupad Paramahamsa Vidyacharya Sthotara Shata. His divine grace, Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Goswami Maharaj Srila Prabhupada ki Jai. Ananta Koti Vaishnava Vrinda ki Jai. Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur ki Jai. Jai Shri Rup Sanatan Bhatta Raghunath Shri Jiva Gopala Bhatta Das Raghunath Shat Goswami Prabhupada ki Jai. Prem se kaho Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaur Bhakta Vrinda ki Jai. Jai Shri Shri Radha Krishna Chandra Gop Gopinath Shama Kunda Radha Kunda Giri Govardhan Giriraj Maharaj ki Jai. Mathura Vrindavan Dham ki Jai. Mayapur Navdeep Dham ki Jai. Shri Kshetra Shri Jagannath Puri Dham ki Jai. गंगा माई की जय, जमुना माई की जय, कावेरी माई की जय, भक्ति देवी की जय, तुलसी महारानी की जय, समवेत भक्त वृंद की जय. Nitai Gaur Premanande, Hari Hari Bol. All glories to the assembled devotees, Hare Krishna. All glories to the assembled devotees, Hare Krishna. All glories to the assembled devotees, Hare Krishna. All glories and glories and glories and glories to Shri Guru and Govardhan Shri Prabhupada ki jai. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Narayanam Namaskritya Naram Chaiva Narottam Devim Saraswatim Vyasam Tato Jayaptirajay. Nastapray Shobhadreshu Nityam Bhagavatam Sevaya Bhagavati Uttama Shloke Bhaktir Bhavati Naistiki. Mukam Karoti Vachalam Pangulam Gayatendrim Yat Kripatamaham Vande Shri Guru Dantarinam Paramanandam Madhamam Shri Chaitanya Ishwaram Hari Om Tat Sat. Hare Krishna. So we're reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 3, Chapter 28. Text numbers are 15 and 16. These are the two texts that we want to discuss today. Allow me to share my screen so that we can look at these shlokas. It's taking a little longer than normal to open the screen. Just give me 1 minute, please. Yes. Okay. We're reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 3. Canto is called the Status Quo. Chapter 28. Chapter 28 is titled as Kapila's Instructions on the Execution of Devotional Service. The text number is 15. Matta dvirefa kayala paritam vanamalaya pararadhya haravalaya kirita angadanupura. Mattadvirefa kalaya paritam vanamalaya pararadhya haravalaya kirita angadanupura. Mattadvirefa kalaya paritam vanamalaya pararadhya haravalaya kirita angadanupura. Word-to-word translation. Matta, intoxicated. Dvirefa, with the bees. Kalaya, humming. Paritam, garlanded. Vanamalaya, with the garland of forest flowers. Pararadhya, priceless. Hara, pearl necklace. Palaya, bracelets. Kirita, a crown. Angada, armlets. Nupuram, anklets. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. Translation: he also wears around his neck a garland of attractive sylvan flowers, and a swarm of bees, intoxicated by its delicious fragrance, hum around the garland. He is further superbly adorned with pearl necklace, a crown, and a pair of armlets, bracelets, and anklets. Purport: from this description, it appears that the flower garland of the Supreme Personality of Godhead is fresh. Actually, in Vaikuntha, or the spiritual sky, there is nothing but freshness. Even the flowers picked up from the trees and the plants remain fresh. For everything in the spiritual sky retains its originality and does not fade. The fragrance of the flowers picked up from the trees and made into garland does not fade, for both the trees and the flowers are spiritual. When the flower is taken from the tree, it remains the same. It does not lose its aroma. The bees are equally attracted to the flowers, whether they are on the garland or on the tree. The significance of spirituality is that everything is eternal and inexhaustible. Everything taken from everything remains everything. Or, as has been stated in the spiritual world, 1 minus 1 equals 1 and 1 plus 1 equals 1. The bees hum around the fresh flowers, and their sweet sound is enjoyed by the Lord. The Lord's bangles, necklace, crown, and anklets are all bedecked with invaluable jewels. Since the jewels and the pearls are spiritual, there is no material calculation of their value. Let's look at text number 16. We will go straight into translation and purport of text number 16. This is the continuation. His loins and hips encircled by a girdle, he stands on the lotus of his devotee's heart. He is most charming to look at, and his serene aspect gladdens the eyes and the souls of the devotees who behold him. Purport to text number 16. The word Darshinayatna Mam, which is used in this verse, means that the Lord is so beautiful that the devotee yogi does not wish to see anything else. He desires to see the beautiful object. His desire to see the beautiful objects is completely satisfied by the sight of the Lord. In the material world, we want to see beauty, but the desire is never satisfied because of the material contamination. All the propensities we feel in the material world are ever unsatisfied. But when our desires to see, hear, touch, etc. dovetail for the satisfaction of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, they are all on the level of topmost perfection. Although the Supreme Personality of Godhead in his eternal form is so beautiful, and pleasing to the heart of the devotees. He does not attract the impersonalist who want to meditate on his impersonal aspects. Such impersonalists meditate simply, fruitlessly labor, in simply fruitless labor. The actual yogi, the actual yogis with half-closed eyes fix on the form of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, not upon anything void or impersonal. Thus ends the Bhaktivedanta purport to Canto 3, Chapter 28, text number 15 and 16. Om Tat Sat. Om Jnana Timirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurudmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Guruve Namah. Shri Chaitanya Manobhistam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yutapatagamalam Shri Gurum Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sadjatam Sahagana Raghunatam Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Saitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakam Vitamscha He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandho Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Vancha Kalpatarobhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya Evacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namah Namo Vishnupadaya Krishna Prestaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swaminiti Namine Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharane Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarine Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Srivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Hare Krishna. Welcome all the devotees to this morning Srimad Bhagavatam discussion. And in this discussion that we see, we continue our discussion from the previous verses of the same chapter, where Mother Devahuti is inquiring and Kapila Muni is giving her the guidance as to what needs to be done. And then we also spoke about all the various kinds of yogas. And here comes the continuation of how a yogi needs to behave. A yogi, Kapila Muni is talking about the form of the Lord. And when the form of the Lord is seen, the yogi also has to really look at it rather than being an impersonal, or thinking of something very, very void. So here in the purport, Srila Prabhupada is, making it very nicely. He's here Kapila Muni is giving the description of the form of the Lord. We see many other kinds of yogis that can meditate on light, some on void, some on effulgence, etc. But Kapila Muni here very clearly describes the form of the Lord on which one needs to really focus up to. And again, this we have discussed in the past as well. Kapila Muni is none other than Supreme Personality of Godhead. Mother Devahuti is great devotee of the Lord. But just to eradicate the misconception that one has to think, saying that we have to focus on void, we have to focus on some effulgence or some light where it is coming. No, that's what has been eradicated here. That's not the way. The authorized way is given here by Lord himself in form of Kapila, who says, please meditate on the specific form of the Lord. Details are given in this few verses, starting from the previous verse to a couple of verses that we see in the as we move forward from here. Matta Dvaifa Kalaya. The honeybees are actually intoxicated because of the uncommon fragrance that is coming from them. If it is a common fragrance, honeybees will also not go to that flower these days, And because there is uncommon fragrance, the honeybees are intoxicated. And the garland around the lotus neck of the Lord is priceless, The ornaments that are giving here described in this verse on 15th verse is Hara, that is the pearl necklace around his neck. Valaya. Valaya is the bracelets, the armlets, the anklets, and then finally, crown on top of his head. He is looking very, very attractive. So Srila Prabhupada explains that freshness in the spiritual world, everything is always fresh. There is no stale, there is no outdated, there is nothing called which is old. Whatever you see in the spiritual world is absolutely fresh all the while. When we talk about the flowers on the tree, they are fresh. There's a nice fragrance. Bees are attracted. At the same time, when the garland is made, the flowers still continue to be fresh. The bees still go around the garlands. They go onto the garlands. They're not intoxicated by the fragrance of that flower. It does not get faded at all. If there is any flower which is eternally fresh, but in the spiritual world, so I'm saying, is there any flower which is eternally fresh? Here in the material world, whatever flowers we see, they give you, some of them are fresh for a couple of minutes, some of them are fresh for a couple of minutes, some of them are fresh for a couple of hours, some of them are fresh for a couple of days. But none of the flowers in the material world are eternally fresh. But in the spiritual world, the flowers are always fresh. Why is it so? Because the flowers are also a spirit. Trees are also a spirit, hence they remain or they remain fresh forever. In the material world, when we talk about mathematics, we say 1 + 1 is equal to 2, or 1 - 1 is equal to 0. That's the material mathematics. But in the spiritual world, 1 + 1 is equal to 1, 1 - 1 is also equal to 1. There's absolutely no change. If you look at the invocation shloka of Ishomanisha, the first shloka, Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnam Udachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnam Evayasa Vashishyate. Let me read the translation for this. The personality of Godhead is perfect and complete. And because he is completely perfect, all the emanations from him, such as his phenomenal world, are perfectly equipped as complete wholes. Whatever is produced of the complete whole is also complete in itself, because he is complete whole. Even though so many complete units emanate from him, he still remains complete balance. It is a different kind of an existence in the spiritual world. None of us have experienced it. Even if we have experienced it, because we are all from spiritual world, unfortunately, we have fallen down to this material because of our desire to be independent of Krishna. So all of us have experienced it, but unfortunately, we don't remember what we have experienced. So it's absolutely a different kind of a feeling or existence in the spiritual. It is called Satchit Ananda. Satchit, eternal. Chit is full of knowledge, and Ananda is full of bliss. So the existence in the material world is opposite to it. Asat, Achit, and Nirananda. It is temporary, it is lump of ignorance, and it is also cause of our unhappiness being in the material world. But in the spiritual world, it is Satchidananda, which is eternal, full of knowledge, and full of bliss. So this is the difference between the material world and the spiritual world. So if we go a little further, then we will ask, how is the Lord that the Lord is ever fresh? Since the Lord is ever fresh, everything connected with him is also fresh. If you look at 64 qualities as described in Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu by Rupa Goswami, the 53rd quality of Krishna is ever fresh. Yeah. For my own benefit, I would like to read this from Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu. Krishna is always remembered, and his name is always chanted by millions of devotees. But the devotees never become saturated. So we see so many of our devotees, including all of us, who've been chanting the holy name of the Lord for such a long time. Some of us for 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, 30 years, so on and so forth. But his name is so fresh, we never get saturated by his name. Instead of becoming disinterested, when we chant the holy name of the Lord nicely, they actually start getting interest into it. We start getting rasa of chanting the holy name more and more and more. Initially when we started our chanting, somebody would say, okay, chant one round. We will chant one round and leave it for a couple of days. And then after some time, again, somebody reminds us to chant one round, and then we will chant one round and then again leave it for a couple of days. But as we progressed, once we started getting the taste of this chanting, we moved on with it. And, we took up to Krishna consciousness with 4 rounds, 8 rounds, 16 rounds and continuing. And, some of the devotees who chant even 32 rounds, 64 rounds every day. Yeah, I have seen and I've met some of these devotees who do Govardhan Parikrama every day, and they chant minimum of 64 rounds every day. There's absolutely no problem at all. Even if we see Namacharya Shri Haridas Thakur, he would chant 64, 64, 64, 3 times 64 rounds that he would chant. And, they would say 64 rounds loudly, 64 rounds softly, and 64 rounds whisperingly. So Namacharya Shri Haridas Thakur would chant 192 rounds every day without fail. And the interest is so much. There's a very interesting story that there's a prostitute who comes to allure Haridas Thakur. This was sent by one of the wealthiest merchant who was very envious of Haridas Thakur. So this Mataji comes and tells Haridas Thakur that, why don't you enjoy me? Haridas Thakur says, yes, Devi, we would do that, but let me complete my rounds. I have 64 rounds left. I have 64 rounds left. I have 64 rounds. So he goes on chanting. He says, yes, I have some more left. I have some more left. This shows very clearly the interest. Once somebody starts chanting, the attachment is so high because the spiritual name is non-different from Krishna. When Krishna is attractive, his spiritual name, his name also becomes very, very attractive. And this prostitute waits overnight. She waits for the whole night, and the next morning, she realizes that, whatever she's been trying to do, or, whatever she was wanting to do to Haridas Thakur was wrong. And she surrenders unto him, saying that this is a mistake that I have done, and I would like to become your disciple. I would like to chant the holy name. And Haridas Thakur actually gives her the holy name, and she starts chanting. And she also gets so attracted to the holy name that she continues to chant. So this is the power. This is the power of the spiritual name, or this is the power of the freshness of Krishna, or this is how people get attracted even to chanting. So many times, we have seen once they start chanting, then they continue at it. Yeah. So is the name of Krishna and his chanting. The devotees get newer and newer impetus to continue the process. We chant 1 round, and then you feel, yeah, I should chant more rounds. Then you move over to 4 rounds, 8 rounds, 16 rounds, and then so on and so forth. Therefore, Krishna is ever fresh. His name is ever fresh. Because he is ever fresh, his name is also ever fresh. And whatever is his creation around is also ever fresh. You see devotees chanting, on certain days, certain special days, we see devotees coming together and chanting 64 rounds. But you still find them ever fresh, At the end of the day, you'll still find them chanting the holy name, and they find it very, very nice and enchanting for them to repeat the holy name of the Lord. Srila Prabhupada gives the example of, a tea seller on the railway station. Yeah, though it is not the same as chanting the Krishna's name. But he says the tea seller, because it is his profession, he doesn't get tired. You'll see when you travel by railways in India, you'll find even in the middle of the night, they will come and say, chai, 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 chai. And he continues. Probably he would be chanting hundreds and thousands of times every day, but he doesn't get tired. Though we are not comparing a tea seller selling tea to, our chanting the Hare Krishna. I'm saying that is the way that tea sellers chant, and at the same time, devotees chant the holy name of the Lord, which is again very, very fresh. So we personally associate with the Lord, who is ever fresh, by chanting his holy name. Not only Krishna himself, but even Krishna's knowledge is ever fresh. How do we say that? Some of us have read Bhagavad Gita, or all of you have read Bhagavad Gita many times over and over again. We discuss on the same shloka over and over again. And this knowledge was imparted 5,000 years ago. This knowledge was actually imparted to Sun God hundreds and thousands of years ago. And still today it is fresh. You pick up Bhagavad Gita and open any shloka and read it, you will find a different meaning. Every time you open Bhagavad Gita, read the same shloka, and and you'll have a better realization or a different realization which is ever fresh. So likewise, we see, when even still today, because this is spoken thousands of years back, even still today, there is new light into it. And it can be read. Every time we read it, we get a different meaning, different understanding. Therefore, Krishna and his name, his fame, his qualities, and everything in relation with Krishna is ever, ever, ever fresh. So every time we read Srimad Bhagavatam or Bhagavad Gita, you get a new perspective to it. And it's a never boring subject at all. Let's take an example of the pastime of Lord Chaitanya. He appeared in the mood of Srimati Radharani and Krishna. Okay, so Krishna explained this in Chaitanya Charitamrita. Chaitanya Charitamrita is written by Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami. And here he says Krishna was once seeing himself in the mirror. While he was looking at himself in the mirror, he was so astonished to see his reflection. It's such a beautiful view for him to look at. He wanted to see more and more and more. So he took the mentality of Radharani. Only then, it is said that only when he takes the mentality of Srimati Radharani, only then I will be able to satisfy to see. Okay, to see, to relish the form of the Lord, the quality of the Lord. Yeah. Then he came up in the mood of Srimati Radharani to relish everything in relation with Krishna. So Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, as we all know, came in as combination of Radha and Krishna. He came in as the combination of Radha Krishna to relish the relationship with Krishna. And if we see Brahma Samhita 5.33, when we read it, Advaita Machuta Manadi Mananta Rupam Adyam Purana Purusham Nava Yauvanam Cha Nava Yauvanam Cha Vedeshu Durlabam Atma Bhakta Govindamadi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami. I worship Govinda, the primeval Lord, who is inaccessible to the Vedas, but he is obtained by pure, unalloyed devotional service of the soul, who is without a second, who is not subject to a decay, and who has no beginning and who has no end. Krishna himself is the beginning and he is eternal Purusha. Yet he is a person possessing beauty of a blooming youth. At the beginning of Kurukshetra war, not at the beginning, during the war of Kurukshetra, Krishna was actually some 80, 90 years in the material sense. If we talk about the age, he was more than 80, 90 years. He had great grandchildren, but he was looking fresh as a 20 years old youth, because he is the origin of everything. Yeah? And we take one more example of a great devotee called Vidura. And Vidura is known for connecting everything with Krishna. So in the third canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, I'll read this for my own benefit. The case is similar with all the mundane literature, but the beauty of the transcendental literature of Bhagavad Gita and Srimad Bhagavatam is that they never become old. They have been read in the world by civilized man for last 5,000 years, and they have never become old. They are ever fresh to the learned scholars and devotees. And even by daily repetition of the verse of Srimad Bhagavad Gita or Srimad Bhagavatam, there is no satiation to devotees like Vidura. So Vidura had heard the pastimes of the Lord many, many, many times. He had actually associated with the Lord physically as well. But still, when he met Maitreya Rishi, he wanted the same narration to be repeated to him, because he was never satiated by the hearing of the pastimes of Krishna. And that is the transcendental nature of the Lord's glorious pastimes. Vidura, when he inquired the message and the pastimes of Lord, he had sufficiently heard. He had sufficiently heard the pastime of the Lord, but still he wanted to hear again and again and again. The things that we see in the material world, we want something new every time that we see it, we want something new. Even if you take the example of a mobile phone, what we were using, say 2-3 years back, we want something new. The newer model comes and the older ones are actually given up. But on the contrary, in the material world, in the spiritual world, there is ever freshness. Whatever was fresh earlier is still fresh today and will continue to be fresh even in future. There's one more example which a devotee, narrated. Near his house, there was a garment factory which actually had come up. And what they would do in this garment factory is, they would get a lot of material, stitch clothes, and then, finish it and then sell it outside. So they were very, inquisitive to know what is happening inside. And there were some 5-10 boys who were actually staying in the factory and doing some work. And these young boys were doing a lot of things. And they were also staying in the factories. So the neighbors really got inquisitive as to what these boys are doing. So once they looked up to the window, after the garment is stitched, after the fresh cloth is used, the garment is stitched, they would add some foam to it and, make it look like faded. We call this as acid wash. Sometimes we see that bullet fire and sand wash and all of that. So what you see is every time they want something new. In the earlier years, they would just wear a plain clothing or plain jeans. But then over a period of time, they wanted sand wash, they want acid wash, they want some bullet fires and all of that. So there's absolutely nothing which remains fresh in the material world. Yeah, some of us see those bell-bottoms pants that we were wearing were of the past. Now you see they were very trim, straight cuts and all of that. So what I'm trying to explain here is, in the material world, there is nothing that remains eternal. But on the contrary, in the spiritual world, everything remains always fresh. Everything remains always new. There is no stale thing that come into the spiritual world. And in the following verse that we really see, we are talking, Srila Prabhupada gives a very nice description in the 16th verse, that in the material world, we want to actually see beauty. But the desire is never satisfied. You want to see a beautiful car, you'll see another beautiful car and forget the previous beautiful car. You see a beautiful building and you see another taller building than that, you forget the previous. And the tall building also becomes old. We see the World Trade Centers. What happened to World Trade Center? They're not permanent. They all crashed with those 2 flights hitting them, and so many people died. So the beauty never stays permanent in the material world, but in the spiritual world, as we directly see, it is always fresh. Krishna's form, Krishna's pastimes, Krishna's beauty, Krishna's instructions, everything remains absolutely fresh, right? Because of the material contamination, all the propensities that we feel in the material world are ever unsatisfied. But when our desire to see, hear, touch, etc., dovetailed, Srila Prabhupada makes the statement, dovetailing was something which, a lot of us did not understand. What is dovetailing? Dovetailing is doing the same thing, but with a different end to it. Directing it to a different direction through Krishna, then there will be satisfaction. So it says, all the desires to see, to hear, to touch are dovetailed for the satisfaction of Supreme Personality of Godhead. They are on the level of topmost perfection. When we, our acharyas have also told us very clearly, saying that whatever money that you make, either by profession or by business or however you get that money, if you dovetail it, if you use it in the service of the Lord, it gets purified. And that's called the topmost perfection. Certain percentage of our incomes that we earn out of our hard labor, hard work, or smart work, whatever you call it as, needs to be used for the service of the Lord. When we use this, then the topmost perfection, or that is at the level of topmost perfection. Although the Supreme Personality of Godhead in his eternal form is very, very beautiful and very pleasing to the heart of the devotees, he does not attract the impersonalists. Now, who are impersonalists? Impersonalists are people who meditate on his impersonal aspect. So Krishna is a person. Srila Prabhupada and our acharyas have multiple times spoken about the impersonalists who are actually focus only on the impersonal aspect of the Lord. So they've condemned this worship of the impersonal aspect or meditation on the impersonal aspect. And those who are this impersonalists, it is absolutely fruitless labor, Srila Prabhupada says. And the true yogi who believes himself to be a yogi, he closes half of his eyes. He doesn't close full eyes, because if you close the full eyes, then he falls asleep. And he fixes his focus on the form of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and he should not focus it on anything void or impersonal. So here, Kapila Muni is giving the description of the form of the Lord as well, which says that we should focus on the personal form of the Lord, and we should focus our attention, we should focus our prayers, we should focus everything on the Supreme Personality of Godhead's form, not that we should do it on an impersonal form. And here it also describes in the 16th verse about the clothes that the Lord is wearing, and he stands on the lotus of everybody's heart. He is most charming to look at, and his serene aspect gladdens the eyes and souls of the devotees who behold him. So what happens is, because he is ever fresh, when we hold him in our eyes, we also become ever fresh. His form, which is always fresh, the Supreme Personality Godhead's form, which is always fresh, is also fresh in our heart. And we have to focus only on that form rather than focus on some effulgence, some light, or some impersonal form of the Lord. So these two verses are very nicely explained by Srila Prabhupada in the purport, and Kapila Muni very clearly gives this instructions to his mother Devahuti, who is inquiring from him on how a devotional service has to be executed. This is an extended chapter. The cantos and the chapters are extended, where Kapila Muni is directing his mother towards the execution of the devotional service. And if we think that Mother Devahuti was not educated, she did not know anything, I think we're doing a mistake. She was the daughter of Manu, and she was all qualified, but because she wanted to serve the devotees and the Supreme Personality of Godhead, she decided that she not decided in that sense of decision, but she requested her father to get her married to Kardam Muni, who was a great devotee of the Lord, and who had at once upon a time desired to have a family life or get into Grahastha ashram. So Kardam Muni is a great elevated personality. Kapila Muni is Supreme Personality of Godhead himself. Mother Devahuti is a very, very elevated devotee. But still, for the benefit of all the devotees and benefit of the humanity at large, this conversation between Kapila Muni and Mother Devahuti is happening, which is giving us the guidelines as to what one needs to do. So here at the conclusion, I would like to add this, saying that Kapila Muni is very clearly speaking about beholding the Lord on he's sitting on a lotus of our heart, and we have to behold the Lord in that sense. And when we behold the Lord in that beautiful form, then we will always be fresh. So Krishna is always fresh, his form is always fresh, spiritual world is always fresh, and when we behold the form of the Lord, we will also become fresh. So I will end our conversation here. If there are any questions, then I would love to take them. And in case if there are any other comments, please make the comments. I'll be happy to answer them. Well, in this, I would like to add this. I'm sorry, I think I missed this out. Starting off the 15th shloka itself, it says he wears around his neck a garland of attractive sylvan flower and the swarm of bees. How can bees be intoxicated? That is because it has a delicious fragrance, and they hum around the garland, And we've all seen the flowers are very, very, very fragrant. And when the flowers are fragrant, a lot of honeybees come around it. They swarm around it, and then take the honey out of it. So like that, the honeybees are still swarming around the garland which the Lord is wearing. Why is that? Because the freshness there is always there. It does not reduce. In our case, when I gave this example saying that some of the flowers stay fresh for a couple of minutes, some of them stay fresh for a couple of hours, some of them stay fresh for a couple of days. But unlike that, the necklace, which I would say not the necklace, the garland, the garland which the Lord is wearing around his lotus neck never gets, never loses its fragrance. It is continuing to have the same fragrance that the fragrance would be there on the tree when you look at it. And it continues. And that's the reason the honeybees are actually swarming around it, because the fragrance continues to be there. It doesn't lose that fragrance. And because it is put on the lotus neck of the Lord, it is put around the neck of the Lord. That is the reason it continues to give that fragrance. So that's the comparison that it is done here, saying that whatever is available on the tree gives the same fragrance, is also put on when it is made into a garland, when we stitch it through all the flowers and make it into a garland and offer it to the Supreme Personality of Godhead, it continues to have the same kind of fragrance, and it attracts the honeybees because they are intoxicated by the delicious fragrance of this garland, which is around the necklace, which is around the lotus neck of the Lord. And apart from that, he is also superbly adorned. Apart from this garland which is there, he is also wearing a pearl necklace, he's wearing a crown, he's wearing a pair of armlets, he's wearing bracelets, he's also wearing anklets. So the Lord is so beautifully dressed, and this is what is actually shown here. And it says, whatever the Lord wears, however, wherever he is, it is nothing less than freshness. So the Lord is always fresh, his belongings are fresh, his whole Vaikunta planet is always fresh. It's only in the material world that we see the perverted reflection of the spiritual world, where everything gets stale, everything becomes old, everything is required to be, new things have to be gotten to replace the old things. But in the spiritual sky, it actually retains its originality and does not fade away at all. Thank you very much for your patient hearing. Sorry if there are any questions, I would love to take them. Otherwise, we will end the session here.
Hare Krishna Prabhu, Danda Pranam.
It's Govardhan Prabhu. Hare Krishna.
Excellent class, Prabhuji. Prabhuji, just a question like, what activities that the people do in the Golok Vrindavan, Prabhuji? When they go there, so what are the activities one has, because I'm really puzzled in hearing this, please.
Very interesting question, Prabhu. Thank you for asking that question. And I think it's the larger interest of everybody who's here attending the class, online, offline, all of them. What is the actual business of people there in Golok? Their only business is serving the Supreme Personality of Godhead, either directly or indirectly. Some of them are making garlands, like we spoke about the garland. Some of them are making the necklace. Some of them are making the armlet. Some of them are making the crown for the Lord. This is the direct service that they may, look at giving it to the Lord. But then there are others who are assisting them. For example, if somebody has to make the crown, or if somebody has to make the garland, you need flowers. So there are devotees who go out and pick up the flowers for the garland and bring it and give it. There are some who go beyond to grow the trees. There are some who do cooking for the Lord. There are some who do offering to the Lord. So the eternal existence that we have in the spiritual world is eternally dedicated to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So there is no other work, like I and you go to the office, we perform business. No, there the only service is serving the Supreme Personality of Godhead, only looking at what pleasure can I offer to the Lord, either directly or indirectly. And that's the only work that we have in spiritual world. Does that answer your question, Prabhu?
Yes. Thank you, Prabhuji.
If there are no other questions, we will end our discussion on Srimad Bhagavatam today. Thank you very much for joining. Granthra Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai, Shri Prabhupada ki jai. Nitai Gaur Premanande, Hari Hari Bol.